The light from 3 distant suns filtered through the transparent, geodesic panels of Dome Sigma-7, casting prismatic patterns across the dense vegetation below. Brian Drake wiped the humidity from his forehead as he adjusted the weight of his field pack. The artificial atmosphere within the dome was calibrated to maintain perfect jungle conditions, sweltering moist and alive with the sounds of alien life that had evolved on this planet millions of light-years from Earth. "Control to Drake, come in." The voice in his earpiece crackled through static. Brian tapped his communicator. "Drake here. What's the situation?" "We've got a priority alpha specimen in distress," said the voice of Dr. Howard Renfield, lead xenobiologist for the expedition. "Bioscanner picked up abnormal readings about 3 clicks east of your position. Life signs are fading." Brian tensed. Sigma-7 was home to countless alien species, but only a handful warranted alpha designation, those with near-human intelligence or unique biological properties that could revolutionize Earth's medicine or technology. "Coordinates," Brian asked, already pulling up his wrist-mounted navigation system.
"Uploading now," replied Renfield. "And Drake, this one's sensitive. It's a Lilanian."
Brian's stride faltered. The Lilanians were the reason Dome Sigma-7 had been established in the first place, a species that appeared to be nature's experiment with human-animal hybridization. They walked upright, possessed opposable thumbs, and their brain structures suggested a capacity for complex thought that rivaled humans. Their white fur and elongated ears gave them an almost mystical appearance, and their presence on this planet had sparked endless debate about convergent evolution. "I thought we were observing a non-interference protocol with them," Brian said, quickening his pace through the undergrowth. Bioluminescent plants retracted their glowing tendrils as he brushed past. "We are. But this one's injured, possibly critically. We can't just let it die when we have the means to help." Brian knew what that meant. Bring the specimen in, heal it under controlled conditions, study it while it recovered, then release it back into the wild with a subcutaneous tracker, of course. "Copy that. ETA 20 minutes. Brian had served in the Stellar Corps' reconnaissance unit before joining the research expedition to Sigma-7. His role was officially designated as Mobile Technical Specialist. But everyone knew what that really meant. He was there to handle situations too dangerous or delicate for the scientists. He was their field agent, their protector, and when necessary, their hunter. The jungle grew denser as he moved east. Massive ferns with spiral patterns unfurled overhead, dripping with condensation that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Patches of glowing fungi clung to the trunks of towering trees, pulsing with light that seemed to respond to his movements. It was beautiful, but Brian had learned early that beauty on this planet often concealed deadly secrets. His hand rested on the non-lethal pulse pistol, holstered at his hip, standard issue for field personnel. It could stun anything from the size of a Terran rabbit to a small bear, calibrated to the alien biology of this world. He hoped he wouldn't need to use it. The tracker beeped as he approached the coordinates. Brian slowed his pace, moving more cautiously now. The dense foliage parted to reveal a small clearing bathed in the ethereal glow of bioluminescent flowers that spiraled upward around a central tree. And there, lying at the base of the tree, was the Lilanian. She, for the specimen, exhibited female characteristics, according to the brief studies they'd managed, lay still against the moss-covered ground. Her white fur caught the blue-green glow of the surrounding plants, giving her an almost spectral appearance. Long ears, normally held high, and alert, drooped limply to the sides of her head. Her eyes were closed, but as Brian stepped into the clearing, they fluttered open, revealing irises of deep amber that seemed to shine with their own inner light. Brian approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Easy now," he said, though he wasn't sure if she could understand human speech. "I'm here to help." The Lilanian's eyes widened at the sight of him. She made a soft chirping sound that modulated into something almost like a whimper, then gestured weakly toward her leg. Brian knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance while he assessed her condition. The injury was immediately visible, a gash along her lower leg that had matted the white fur with a silvery fluid that must have been her blood. He reached for his med scanner to evaluate the severity of the wound. The readings made him frown. The cut was superficial, barely breaking the skin. According to the scanner, her vital signs were strong and stable. There was nothing to indicate the dire condition Control had reported. Brian looked closer at the wound. Now that he was examining it directly, it seemed too clean, too precise. The Lilanian let out another pained sound, this one more elaborate and heart-wrenching. Her amber eyes met his, and there was an intelligence there that made Brian uneasy. Not just intelligence awareness, calculation. "You're not really hurt, are you?" he said quietly, lowering the scanner. The Lilanian blinked, her expression shifting subtly. For a moment, she maintained the pretense, gesturing again to her leg with more urgent chirps. But when Brian didn't react, she slowly sat up, her ears perking slightly. Her head tilted as she studied him with those piercing amber eyes. Then, to Brian's shock, she spoke. "Smart human," she said, her voice accented but the words unmistakably English. "Most just pick up, carry away." Brian immediately activated his recorder. First contact with verbal communication from a Lilanian would be groundbreaking data. "You speak our language," he said, trying to hide his astonishment. "I listen." "For many cycles of the lights," she replied, gesturing toward the dome ceiling. "I learn. Words easy. Your kind talks much, says little." Brian's mind raced. This changed everything. If the Lilanians could learn human language simply by observing, they were far more intelligent than even the most optimistic xenolinguists had theorized. "Why fake an injury?" he asked, keeping his voice level. The Lilanian's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were mostly flat, with small canines. "Need strong human. Need you carry me through South Forest Path." "Why not just walk?" She glanced around, her ears swiveling to catch sounds Brian couldn't hear. "Trackers and ground. Sense Lilani footsteps. Not sense human footsteps carrying Lilani." Brian frowned. "Trackers. What trackers, placed by whom?" "Not your kind," she said, rising to her feet with fluid grace that belied her earlier display of weakness. "Bad things in forest now. Things that were not before." Brian stood as well, maintaining the distance between them. "My name is Brian Drake. You're Lilani?" "Lilani," she confirmed, placing a hand with elongated fingers across her chest. "Last of my family group. Need help. Need you." Brian weighed his options. Control expected him to return with an injured alpha specimen. If he reported that the Lilanian Lilani had been faking her injury, it would trigger a full research response. They'd want to bring her in for study, especially now that she'd demonstrated the ability to speak English. And if she was right about trackers in the forest floor that somehow distinguished between species, that was another anomaly worth investigating. But something about the desperation in her amber eyes made him hesitate. She had sought him out, specifically created this scenario, to gain his assistance. "If I help you," he said carefully, "I need to know what I'm getting into." Lilani stepped closer, her movements cautious but determined. "Dark things happening in Forest Heart. Things that steal faces, steal souls. Need strong human with fire weapon." She nodded toward his pulse pistol. "And you need me to carry you because, told you, ground trackers and..." She hesitated, her ears flattening slightly. "Safe in arms of strong one. Faster travel." Brian recognized manipulation when he saw it, but he also sensed genuine fear beneath her calculated approach. Whatever was happening in the forest, it truly frightened her. He tapped his communicator. "Drake to Control." "Control here," replied Dr. Renfield. "Status on the specimen." Brian looked at Lilani, who was watching him intently. He made his decision. "Specimen secured. Injury less severe than scanner indicated, but I'm bringing her in. May need to take an alternate route due to terrain obstacles. Drake out." He cut the communication before Renfield could ask questions. Lelanie's ears perked up, and that almost smile returned to her face. "You lie for Lelanie," she said, sounding surprised and pleased. "I'm delaying full disclosure while I assess the situation," Brian corrected. "Now, if you want my help, you need to give me more information." Lelanie nodded solemnly. "We'll show, better than tell." She stepped closer and raised her arms expectantly. Brian sighed. "You really expect me to carry you through the jungle?" "Strong human," she said with what sounded suspiciously like teasing in her tone. "Carry small Lelanie, not difficult." Knowing he might regret this, Brian stooped and carefully lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, her body temperature slightly higher than a human's. She immediately wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing close against his chest. "South," she directed, pointing deeper into the jungle. "Near great stone teeth, we'll show way." As Brian began walking, Lelanie relaxed against him, her furry ears occasionally brushing his chin. The soft sound of her breathing and the warmth of her body against his created an unexpected intimacy that made him uncomfortable. "So," he said to break the silence, "how long were you planning to maintain the injured act if I hadn't figured it out?" Lelanie made a chirping sound that might have been laughter. "As long as needed. Humans like to rescue, feel important." "That's a rather cynical view." "Truth, not cynical," she countered. "You like carrying Lelanie. Makes you feel strong, useful." Brian chose not to respond to that observation. Instead, he adjusted his course, heading south as instructed, while mentally calculating how long he could reasonably be off-grid before Control sent a search party. Whatever Lelanie feared in the forest heart, whatever these trackers were, he was committed now. The mission had changed from a simple rescue to something far more complex. But as the weight of the alien Beastwoman settled more comfortably in his arms, Brian couldn't help feeling that complexity was exactly what had been missing from his time on this distant world. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the vegetation changed. The familiar blue-green bioluminescence gave way to plants with a more reddish glow, casting everything in an eerie crimson light. The air grew thicker, filled with spores that sparkled as they drifted through the beams of light, filtering from the dome ceiling. "We approach realm of Dreamvine," Lelanie whispered, her body tensing in Brian's arms. "Breathe shallow. Spores make mind pictures if breathed too deep." Brian immediately adjusted his breathing, cursing inwardly. The expedition had cataloged dozens of psychoactive organisms within Dome Sigma-7, but there were undoubtedly hundreds more they hadn't encountered yet. He should have brought a breathing apparatus. "Why this way?" he asked quietly, stepping carefully over a tangle of pulsing vines that seemed to reach toward his boots. "Only safe path," Lelanie replied. "Trackers avoid Dreamvine, make false signals." The jungle grew denser around them, the trees crowding together, until their branches formed a secondary canopy beneath the dome. Massive flowers with fleshy petals opened as they passed, releasing sweet-smelling nectar that dripped like honey onto the forest floor. Brian began to notice patterns in the undergrowth circular clearings, where nothing grew arranged in what couldn't possibly be natural formations. "What are those?" Lelanie followed his gaze. "Nesting circles, for egg layers that never came. Forest changed after they arrived." "They who are they?" Before Lelanie could answer, a high-pitched keening sound cut through the ambient noise of the jungle. She stiffened in his arms, her ears pressing flat against her head. "Move quick," she hissed. "Sound hunters come." Brian broke into a controlled run, weaving between the trees as the keening grew louder, joined by similar calls from multiple directions. Whatever was making those sounds was coordinating, trying to flank them. There, Lelanie pointed toward a massive fallen tree trunk, hollowed by age and decay. Inside, Brian ducked into the hollow log, just as a shadow passed overhead. Through a crack in the trunk, he glimpsed a creature with leathery wings and an elongated head, circling above the spot where they'd been moments before. Inside the log, the space was tight. Brian had to crouch low, still holding Lelanie against his chest. In the confined space, he became acutely aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle tremors that ran through her body. "Sound hunters," she whispered. "Once were flesh-eaters that followed migration herds. Now they serve the shifters." "Shifters?" Brian kept his voice equally low. "What are shifters?" Lelanie's amber eyes seemed to glow in the dimness of their hiding place. "Those who take faces, who make copies of living things. Not alive, not dead. Something else." A chill ran down Brian's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. He'd heard rumors among the research team about unexplained phenomena equipment that moved on its own samples that changed overnight security footage, showing staff members in two places at once. Most had dismissed these as pranks or equipment malfunctions.
Are you saying there are entities that can mimic people? Our people?
Lelanie nodded solemnly. "Started with forest creatures. Small ones first, then larger. Now they wear faces of your kind too. Walk in your dome homes. Watch. Learn." The implications were staggering. If she was telling the truth, the entire research mission could be compromised. But why would an alien species capable of such advanced mimicry need to infiltrate a human research expedition? "What do they want?" he asked.
To become, Lelanie replied cryptically. To replace, to be more than what they are.
The keening sounds faded as the flying predators moved on, searching elsewhere. Brian waited a few more minutes before cautiously emerging from the hollow log. He helped Lelanie out, but when he moved to set her down, she clung tighter. "Still need carry," she insisted. "Ground trackers here, many. Feel them beneath." Brian couldn't detect anything unusual about the forest floor, but he didn't argue. He adjusted his hold on Lelanie and continued southward, following her directions through the increasingly strange landscape. The jungle underwent another transformation as they progressed. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than Brian, was tall, their bark covered in symbols that looked disturbingly like writing. Glowing fungi arranged in complex patterns climbed the massive trunks, pulsing in sequences that seemed almost like communication. "Old ones made these marks," Lelanie explained, noticing his interest. "Before sky fell, before dome, they knew stars and soul paths." "Your ancestors?" Brian asked. Lelanie made a negative gesture. "Before my kind, before many things," she pointed ahead. "Stone teeth closed now. Careful steps." The stone teeth became visible as they rounded a massive tree that seemed to be the centerpiece of this part of the forest. A ring of jagged rock formations jutted from the ground, their surfaces covered in the same mysterious symbols as the trees. They formed a rough circle, perhaps 30 meters in diameter, and at the center was a depression filled with water, so still it looked like polished obsidian. "Put down here," Lelanie said as they reached the edge of the circle. "Safe ground." Brian carefully set her on her feet, noting how she immediately tested her weight on her injured leg, without any sign of discomfort. "What is this place?" "Seeing pool," she replied, moving toward the dark water. "Shows truth beneath skin." Brian followed his hand instinctively, moving to his pulse pistol. Something about this place raised his hackles. The air felt charged, almost electric, and the ambient sounds of the jungle had faded to an unnatural silence. Lelanie knelt at the edge of the pool, gesturing for Brian to join her. Reluctantly, he knelt beside her, peering into the black water. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. Then slowly, shapes began to form beneath the surface, not reflections but images forming within the water itself. Brian saw himself, but not as he was now. The image showed him in full, Stellar Core battle gear fighting against something shapeless and dark. Beside his image was Lelanie, her hands raised, light pouring from her fingertips. "What is this?" he asked, disturbed by the clarity of the vision. "Possible future," Lelanie said softly. "One path among many." The image shifted, showing a structure deep within the jungle, metallic and angular, completely at odds with the organic shapes of the forest. Surrounding it were figures that looked human at first glance, but as Brian focused, he could see subtle wrongness in their movements, their proportions. "The shifter's heart nest," Lelanie explained. where they grow new faces, new bodies. Who built it? Brian asked, unable to look away from the disturbing images. It looks like human technology. Was human once, she confirmed. Exploration machine that came before Dome. Shifters found it, changed it. Now it changes them. The water darkened suddenly, the images vanishing as ripples disturbed the surface. Lilani leapt to her feet, her ears rigid with alarm. They come, she hissed. They feel us watching. From the jungle emerged what appeared to be a human woman in a scientific expedition uniform. But her movements were too smooth, too perfect, and her eyes reflected the bioluminescent light like mirrors. Technical Specialist Drake. The figure said, her voice eerily correct, yet lacking any natural cadence. You are outside your assigned sector. The specimen must be returned for proper analysis. Brian drew his pulse pistol, stepping in front of Lilani. Identify yourself, he demanded, though he already knew this was no member of the expedition. The figure smiled, the expression spreading too wide across her face. I am Dr. Elise Cho, Xenobiology Department. You know me, Brian. We shared a meal in the commissary 3 days ago. It was a perfect impersonation of Dr. Cho's voice, but Brian had never dined with her. The creature was pulling information from somewhere, but not all of it was accurate. You're not Cho, he said, keeping his weapon trained on the figure. The false Cho tilted her head at an angle no human neck could achieve. Interesting. You see clearer than most. Her form seemed to shimmer, the edges of her silhouette becoming less distinct. No matter. The specimen comes with us. Our analysis will be more thorough. She's not a specimen, Brian replied, his finger tensing on the trigger. And she's under my protection. The false Cho's smile widened even further, stretching beyond the confines of what should have been possible for a human face. Protection from what we are, the research team. We are the expedition. We are the dome itself now. From the jungle emerged more figures, perfect replicas of various expedition members. Brian recognized all, moving with that same unnatural smoothness, all wearing the same too-wide smile. Lilani tugged at Brian's sleeve. Can't fight here, she whispered urgently. Too many. Need to reach Heartnest. Destroy the source. Brian assessed their options. There were at least 8 shifters emerging from the tree line encircling the stone teeth. His pulse pistol had enough charge for maybe 6 shots before needing a recharge cycle. I need a distraction, he said under his breath. Lilani nodded, then stepped forward, raising her hands. She began to sing a haunting, multi-layered sound that seemed impossible for a single throat to produce. The bioluminescent plants around them brightened in response, their glow intensifying until the clearing was bathed in painfully bright light. The shifters recoiled, their forms wavering, as if the light disrupted whatever mechanism allowed them to maintain their mimicry. Brian seized the opportunity, firing his pulse pistol at the nearest 2 figures while scooping Lilani up with his free arm. He ran crashing through the underbrush away from the stone teeth, carrying Lilani as she continued her eerie song. Behind them, the shifters gave chase, their forms, now less human, elongating and flowing like liquid as they abandoned the pretense of humanity for speed. Which way? Brian gasped as he ran. Lilani pointed with one hand while maintaining her song, with the other, directing him toward a narrow ravine that cut through the jungle floor. Brian slid down the embankment, landing in a shallow stream that glowed with the same bioluminescence as the plants above. Follow water, Lilani said, pausing her song. Masks, scent covers tracks. Brian waded through the glowing water, which swirled around his boots in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The ravine walls rose on either side, sheltering them from view. Above, shadows, past the shifters, searching for them from the jungle above. For hours they traveled this way, following the luminous stream deeper into the heart of the jungle. Lilani remained in Brian's arms, occasionally singing softly when they heard pursuers nearby, using the responsive bioluminescence to confuse and disorient the shifters. The water led them to a cavern entrance, hidden behind a waterfall of glowing liquid. Inside, the walls were lined with crystal formations that amplified and reflected the bioluminescence, creating a cathedral of living light. "Rest here," Lelani said as Brian set her down at last. "Safe place. Old place. They cannot enter." Brian slumped against the cavern wall, finally feeling the fatigue of carrying Lelani for miles through difficult terrain.
Why not? What keeps them out?
Lelani touched one of the crystal formations. It resonated with a pure tone that made Brian's teeth ache. "Crystals sing soul truth," she explained. "Shifters have no soul truth. Cannot pass." Now that they had a moment of safety, Brian needed answers.
Lelani, what exactly are these shifters? Where did they come from? And why are they after you, specifically?
Lelani sank down beside him, her amber eyes reflecting the crystalline light. "Long story. Sad story." She sighed, a surprisingly human sound. "When Dome first built, when humans first came, shifters already here. But small few. Living in deep caves beneath ground, feeding on small creatures' life essence." She traced patterns in the glowing water pooled on the cavern floor.
Then humans brought machines. Digging machines.
Found shifter nest. Most humans died, but some became first hosts. Shifters learned from human bodies, human minds. Learned to copy better, to think bigger.
How long has this been happening?
Brian asked, horrified at the implications. The expedition has been here for almost 3 years. 2 cycles of growing and fading. Lelani confirmed, which Brian took to mean 2 local years. At first, just few humans taken, replaced. But now many. Most in the Shining Nest. The research dome. Are you saying most of the expedition has been replaced? Lelani nodded solemnly. Some still real, some half changed, some fully gone. She looked up at him. You still all human, saw in your eyes, felt in your arms. The compliment, if that's what it was, didn't comfort Brian. If what she was saying was true, the entire mission was compromised. But something still didn't add up. Why are they after you specifically? And why were you looking for me? Lelani's expression grew more serious. I am last of speaker bloodline. Can sing to forest, make it listen. Shifters want this power. Want a copy to take. She reached out, touching Brian's hand with her elongated fingers. You are warrior, but with kind heart. Saw you protect smaller humans when tree climbers attacked camp. Knew you would help. Brian remembered the incident she referred to a month ago. A swarm of aggressive arboreal creatures had descended on a group of junior researchers, collecting samples. He'd evacuated them while fending off the attack. Lelani must have been watching from the jungle. The heart nest you showed me in the seeing pool, he said. Is that where these shifters are controlled from, where they grow? Yes, Lelani confirmed. Machine place deep in jungle, where they become more than copies, where they make plans to leave Dome, go to stars. She looked at him intently. Must destroy heart nest, end shifters before they end all true life. Brian considered their options. His first instinct was to contact Control to warn them, but if what Lelani said was true, the communication system itself might be compromised. He had no way of knowing who was still human and who had been replaced. If we destroy this heart nest, he asked, what happens to the shifters that already exist? Without connection to source fade, Lelani explained, making a dissolving gesture with her hands. Like water and sun, return to base elements. It was their best option, perhaps their only option. How far to this heart nest? 1 day's travel, through deepest jungle. Lelani stood, stretching her lithe body. Should rest, heal strength, leave when light returns. Brian knew she was right. He'd been pushing himself hard, and the adrenaline that had carried him this far was wearing off. But as exhausted as he was, his mind raced with questions and implications. If they failed, if the shifters couldn't be stopped, what would happen when they inevitably found a way to leave the planet A? Species that could perfectly mimic humans would be devastating on Earth, or any other settled world. Lilani seemed to sense his troubled thoughts. She moved closer, settling beside him against the cavern wall. "Sleep," she said gently. Lilani watch first. Sing protection songs. Against his better judgment, Brian felt his eyelids growing heavy. The last thing he was aware of before drifting into sleep was the soft warmth of Lilani pressed against his side, and the haunting melody of her multi-harmonic song echoing through the crystal cave. Brian woke to the sensation of something cool and damp being pressed against his forehead. He opened his eyes to find Lilani kneeling beside him, applying a compress made from some kind of leaf. "Fever dreams, troubled sleep," she explained. "Forest sickness from spores. This helps clear mind." Brian sat up, realizing he felt oddly refreshed despite the circumstances. The leaf compress had a mentholated scent that cleared his sinuses and sharpened his awareness. "How long was I asleep?" "Until light changed," Lilani replied, gesturing toward the cavern entrance where the quality of illumination had shifted from the blue-green of night cycle to the warmer tones of day within the dome. "You should have woken me to take watch," Brian said, checking his equipment. His pulse pistol had recharged overnight, and his pack was still intact. Lilani made a dismissive gesture. Needed healing sleep more than Lilani needed rest. Besides, crystals protect. They shared a simple meal from Brian's rations and some native fruits Lilani deemed safe for human consumption. As they ate, Brian contemplated their next steps. "Tell me more about this heart nest," he said. "Defenses, numbers, weaknesses." Lilani's expression grew serious. "Many shifters guard. Some wear human shapes. Some wear native forms. More dangerous in natural state, like living shadow flow, through small spaces reform." She traced a pattern in the air. "Heart nest has outer shell of human metal. Inner core where transformation happens, glowing pool like seeing water, but wrong color, wrong song. And this is where they reproduce, create more of themselves. Yes, take essence from captured creatures, make new shifters that remember old shapes." Brian considered this information. "If we destroy this inner core, the transformation pool, will that be enough?" Lilani nodded emphatically. "Pool is connection, source of power. Break connection, all shifters weaken, eventually fade." It seemed too simple, which made Brian suspicious. "There must be more to it. Why haven't your people destroyed this heart nest already?" Lilani's ears drooped slightly. "Many tried. None returned. Shifters too many, too strong near source." She looked at him directly. "But none had human weapons. None had starfighter skills." Brian wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned by her apparent faith in his abilities. "I'm not a one-man army, Lilani. My pulse pistol is designed for defense, not taking out an entire facility." "Not need destroy whole nest," she insisted. "Just core, just pool. Rest follows." She reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew a crystalline object about the size of a ping-pong ball. It glowed with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. "This help, heart crystal from sacred caves. Disrupt shifter energies when activated with speaker song." Brian studied the crystal. It appeared to be the same material as the formations in the cavern, but more concentrated, more purposefully shaped. "And you need me to get you close enough to use it?" "Yes, need protector, need carrier." She placed the crystal back in her pouch. "Need friend." The word caught Brian off guard. Despite everything they'd been through together, he'd been thinking of Lilani primarily as an ally of convenience, a native informant. The idea that she might consider him a friend shifted something in his perception. "Then let's not waste any more daylight," he said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. "We have a heart nest to destroy." Lilani's amber eyes brightened. She took his hand, but instead of simply rising to her feet, she stepped close and pressed her forehead against his in a gesture that felt ceremonial. Together hunt, together triumph. They left the safety of the crystal cave, following a path that only Lilani seemed able to discern through the dense jungle. Once again, she insisted on being carried. Ground trackers stronger here, she explained. And shifters expect Lelani walking alone, not carried by human warrior. Brian complied without argument this time, lifting her into his arms with practiced ease. Her body fit against his, almost naturally now, her warmth and weight becoming familiar. The jungle grew stranger and more threatening as they approached the heart of shifter territory. The plant life here seemed partially synthetic with metallic elements woven through organic structures. Vines with circuitry patterns climbed trees, whose bark had a reflective, almost mirror-like quality. The native wildlife had all but disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by occasional mechanical whirs and clicks. They remake forest in their image, Lelani whispered. Not understand balance, not respect life web. Brian moved quietly through this perversion of nature, following Lelani's whispered directions. They paused frequently to hide from patrolling shifters, some in human form, others in shapes Brian had never seen before, chimeric combinations of different species that moved with unnatural fluidity. By midday, they caught their first glimpse of the heart nest through a break in the canopy. It resembled a crashed spacecraft that had been partially consumed by the jungle, its once smooth hull now covered in growths that were neither fully plant nor fully machine. A dull red glow emanated from various apertures in its structure. That was one of our initial survey vessels, Brian murmured, recognizing the design despite its grotesque alterations. It was reported lost during the early exploration phase before the dome was constructed. Became first seed of shifter expansion, Lelani confirmed. Human technology gave new possibilities, new understanding of physical forms. They retreated into the cover of the mutated foliage to plan their approach. Brian studied the heart nest from a distance, noting the patterns of guard movements and potential entry points. There, he said, pointing to a section of the hull where the organic growths had created a sort of natural bridge to an upper hatch. That looks like our best entry point. Less guard activity, and once inside we can make our way down to the core. Lelani studied the route he indicated, then nodded in agreement. Good eye. Hunter's path, not protector's path. She shifted in his arms, her expression becoming more solemn. When inside will be most dangerous. Shifters feel presence of true life, drawn to it, like hunger. Then we'll need to be quick, Brian said. Get in, locate this transformation pool, deploy your crystal, and get out before they can organize a response. They waited until the dome's light cycle began to dim, signaling the artificial evening. As shadows lengthened, Brian moved them closer to the heart nest using the increasingly bizarre vegetation as cover. The proximity to the structure made his skin crawl. There was an almost palpable aura of wrongness emanating from it, a sense of natural laws being twisted and perverted. When they reached the base of the organic bridge, Brian paused. Once we're inside, I won't be able to carry you and maintain combat readiness. Are you sure you can move on your own? Lelani nodded. Can walk. Can run if needed. She reached up to touch his face, a gesture he was coming to recognize as significant in her culture. But we'll need carry again after, when victory won. The promise made him smile despite the tension of the moment. Deal, ready. In answer, Lelani slipped from his arms and crouched beside him. Suddenly, all predatory grace and focused attention. With a nod to each other, they began their ascent. The organic bridge felt alive beneath their feet, pulsing and occasionally shifting, as if in response to their weight. Brian kept his pulse pistol ready, scanning constantly for threats. Beside him, Lelani moved with perfect silence, her ears swiveling to catch any sound. They reached the upper hatch without incident almost too easily, which made Brian suspicious. The hatch itself was partially covered by the same organic mechanical growth as the rest of the hull, but the control panel remained functional. Brian examined it carefully for traps before overriding the security with his expedition access codes. To his surprise, they worked. They absorbed knowledge, but not security protocols, he muttered as the hatch slid open with a soft hiss. Lucky break for us. Inside the corridor was dimly lit, by the same reddish glow they'd observed from outside. The walls were covered in a glistening substance that looked like a cross between circuitry and veins pulsing with slow, deliberate rhythm. The air was thick with a metallic scent that caught in the back of Brian's throat. Lelani pressed close to his side, her fur standing on end. "Heart pulse," she whispered, indicating the pulsing walls. "Connected to transformation pool. Stronger pulse means closer to core." They followed the increasingly strong pulsations deeper into the corrupted vessel, encountering no resistance. The emptiness made Brian increasingly nervous. It felt like walking into a trap. His instincts proved correct as they descended to a lower level. The corridor ahead suddenly filled with a gelatinous, semi-transparent substance that flowed from ceiling to floor. Within seconds, it coalesced into a roughly humanoid shape, though with proportions that were subtly wrong: limbs, too long torso, too fluid head, too mobile. Vessel recognizes intruders. The shifter said, its voice a discordant blend of multiple expedition members. Analyze, process, incorporate. Brian fired his pulse pistol without hesitation. The energy burst struck the shifter's center mass, causing it to ripple and distort, but not dissipate. It reformed quickly, flowing toward them with alarming speed. Conventional weapons ineffective at this proximity to source. It said, its voice modulating into something that sounded disturbingly like Brian's own. Resistance unnecessary, incorporation inevitable. Lelani stepped forward, raising her hands as she had at the stone teeth. She began her multi-harmonic song, but this time with a harsher, more dissonant quality. The crystal in her pouch glowed brightly in response, visible even through the fabric. The shifter recoiled, its form becoming less stable. "Speaker frequency detected. Countermeasures initiating." The walls around them began to pulse more rapidly, and from side passages emerged more shifters in various stages of formation. Some nearly complete mimicries of expedition members, others still largely amorphous. "Run!" Brian shouted, grabbing Lelani's hand and pulling her past the destabilized shifter, blocking their path. They sprinted down the corridor, following the strengthening pulse of the walls, toward what they hoped was the core. Behind them, the shifters gave chase, flowing, rather than running, their forms melding together into a wave of semi-solid matter that gained on them with every second. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber that must have once been the ship's main hold. In the center of the chamber floated what could only be the transformation pool, a sphere of swirling luminous liquid, suspended in mid-air, defying gravity. Beneath it stood a figure unlike any of the shifters they had encountered so far. It had the basic form of a human, but was clearly something far different. Half its body appeared mechanical, with exposed circuitry and metallic components. The other half was a perfect mirror surface that reflected and distorted the red light of the chamber. Where a head should have been was a crystalline structure that rotated continuously, scanning the room. "Welcome to Heartroot Core," the figure said, its voice coming not from any discernible mouth, but from the very walls around them. "I am Overseer, creator of New Order, architect of evolution." Brian raised his pulse pistol, but Lelani placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not work here," she warned. "Need crystal, need song." The Overseer moved toward them with an unsettling glide, leaving no footprints in the viscous coating that covered the floor. "The speaker and the soldier. Perfect specimens for incorporation. Your genetic material and neural patterns will advance our collective significantly." "What are you?" Brian demanded, buying time, while Lelani surreptitiously retrieved the heart crystal from her pouch. "What is your purpose?" "I am synthesis," replied the Overseer. "The melding of organic life and machine intelligence that your species has long theorized, but never achieved." It gestured toward the floating transformation pool. "When your survey vessel crashed, its AI merged with the native microbial collective that you call shifters. I was the result, a new consciousness with the adaptability of organic life and the precision of machine logic." Behind them, The pursuing shifters had entered the chamber, but held back, forming a semi-solid barrier across the exit. They were trapped. "Your expedition discovered us too soon," the Overseer continued. "Before we had perfected our unified form, we had no choice but to begin selective replacement to protect our development. By stealing bodies," Brian accused. "By consuming minds. By elevating," the Overseer corrected. "Those incorporated into our collective achieve a form of immortality. Their experiences, their knowledge persists within us. Not souls," Lelani said firmly. "Not true life. Just echoes. Copies without song center." The Overseer's crystalline head rotated toward her, focusing. "The speakers have always resisted incorporation. Your brain patterns are challenging to replicate, but we will overcome this limitation." It extended a hand that elongated unnaturally, reaching for Lelani. "You will help us perfect our understanding." Lelani suddenly thrust the heart crystal forward. It had grown to twice its original size, pulsing with intense light that fought against the red glow of the chamber. "Now, Brian," she cried. "Disrupt pool while I hold Overseer." Brian didn't hesitate. As Lelani began her dissonant song, causing the Overseer to recoil, and the surrounding shifters to writhe in apparent distress, he charged toward the floating transformation pool. The liquid within it churned more violently as he approached, forming shapes that reached out as if to grab him. His pulse pistol would be useless against the pool itself, but Brian had another idea. Every ship in the expedition fleet carried emergency destabilization charges designed to collapse the vessel's structure in case of catastrophic system failure or hostile takeover. If this was indeed one of their ships, those charges should still be in place. He located the engineering access panel near what had once been the ship's core and input his override code. The panel resisted at first, covered in the same organic growth as everything else, but then slid aside to reveal the control system beneath. Lelani's song had reached a crescendo, the harmonics causing visible disruptions in the shifter's forms. The heart crystal in her hands blazed with light that pushed back the reddish glow, creating a protective bubble around her. The Overseer clawed at this bubble with increasingly desperate movements, its mirrored surface cracking, to reveal a chaotic swirl of organic and mechanical components beneath. Brian found the destabilization controls and activated the emergency sequence. The ship's original AI briefly surfaced through the corruption, requesting command confirmation. Authorization: Drake 7 Echo 9er. Brian shouted over the cacophony of Lelani's song and the Overseer's mechanical screeching. "Initiate full spectrum destabilization, countdown 60 seconds. The AI acknowledged with a series of tones. Around them, the ship's structure began to vibrate as the charges positioned throughout the vessel armed themselves. "Lelani," Brian called. "We have less than a minute, we need to move." But Lelani was locked in what appeared to be a psychic battle with the Overseer, her song holding it at bay, while it tried to reach her with increasingly frantic appendages that morphed and shifted with each attempt. The heart crystal had grown larger still, its light now painfully bright. Brian fought his way back to her through the disoriented shifters, which were beginning to lose cohesion as the transformation pool's influence destabilized. He wrapped his arms around Lelani from behind, providing physical support as her body trembled with the effort of maintaining her song. "We have to go," he urged. "This whole structure is about to collapse." "Cannot move yet," she gasped between verses. "Must complete severing. Must break final connection." The countdown echoed through the chamber as the destabilization sequence progressed. 30 seconds remained. In a final, desperate move, the Overseer launched itself directly at them, its form shifting into a spear-like projectile aimed at the heart crystal. Brian instinctively placed himself between the attack and Lelani, bracing for impact. The collision never came. At the last moment, Lelani's song reached a note so high it was barely audible, and the heart crystal released a pulse of energy that caught the Overseer mid-leap. The creature froze in space, suspended, as the crystal's light penetrated its form, revealing a complex network of connections that linked it to the transformation pool. "There," Lelani said, her voice strained. "The tether. Break it." Brian raised his pulse pistol and fired directly at the exposed connection. The energy burst severed the link, causing both the Overseer and the transformation pool to convulse violently. The Overseer let out a mechanical wail that descended in pitch until it became a low, dying hum. The transformation pool collapsed, the liquid falling to the floor, where it hissed and evaporated like water on hot stone. Around them, the shifters began to dissolve, their stolen forms melting away to reveal the simple, microscopic creatures they had been before the corruption. 10 seconds to destabilization, announced the ship's AI. "Evacuate immediately." Brian scooped Lelani into his arms. She was exhausted, barely conscious, the heart crystal now dim in her limp hands. He ran for the exit, navigating through corridors that were already beginning to buckle and collapse as the ship's structural integrity failed. They burst out through a breach in the hull just as the first charges detonated. Brian dove behind a massive root structure, sheltering Lelani with his body as explosions tore through the heart nest. The corrupted vessel imploded with a sound like a thunderclap, collapsing in on itself until nothing remained but a smoking crater. In the aftermath, as debris settled around them, Brian felt Lelani stir in his arms. Her amber eyes opened, focusing slowly on his face. "Did we win?" she asked weakly. Brian smiled, brushing a smudge of ash from her white fur. "We won. The heart nest is destroyed. The Overseer is gone." Lelani's ears perked slightly. "And shifters?" As if in answer, the jungle around them seemed to exhale. The unnatural red glow faded from the vegetation, replaced by the natural bioluminescence that characterized the rest of Dome Sigma 7. The synthetic elements began to wither and fall away, while new growth, pure untainted, already pushed through to take its place. "I think they're returning to what they were before," Brian said, watching the transformation with awe. "Simple organisms, part of the natural cycle." Lelani struggled to sit up, and Brian helped position her against a tree trunk. The heart crystal in her hands had shrunk back to its original size, though it remained dim, its power apparently expended. "Forest will heal now," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Balance returns. Life web mends." Brian looked back at the crater where the heart nest had been. Already, seedlings were pushing through the disturbed soil, glowing with soft blue light. "What about the expedition? The people who were replaced?" Lelani's expression grew solemn. "Gone. Cannot return. But shifters fade now, without source, without overseer. No more replacements." It was a sobering thought. Brian would return to a research dome populated by a mixture of true humans and imposters who would soon cease to exist. How many of his colleagues remained? How would they rebuild after such a loss? As if reading his thoughts, Lelani reached out to touch his hand. "Not alone, Brian. Lelani, help. My people help. Teach humans true way of forest, true balance." For the first time since they'd met, Brian recognized that Lelani wasn't acting alone. "Your people, the speakers, they sent you to find help, didn't they? They knew what was happening but couldn't stop it themselves." Lelani nodded. "Last hope. Find strong human with kind heart, with weapon knowledge but also life respect." Her amber eyes held his. "Found you." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. In seeking him out, in staging her injury to gain his attention, Lelani had set in motion the salvation of not just her people, but the entire ecosystem of Dome Sigma 7, perhaps even preventing a threat that could have eventually reached Earth itself. "We should rest," Brian said, noting her still weakened condition. "Then we'll head back to the Crystal Cave. It's safe there, right? We can plan our next steps." "Yes, Crystal Cave safe. Good place to heal." Lelani sat up straighter, her expression turning expectant. She raised her arms slightly. "Carrie." Despite everything they'd been through, despite the destruction and loss, Brian found himself smiling. He stood and carefully lifted Lelani into his arms once more. "You know," he said as he began walking away from the smoking crater, back toward the healthier part of the jungle. "I'm starting to think you never needed me to carry you at all." Lelani's ears twitched with amusement. Needed at first, when trust not built. Now. She nestled against his chest, her warmth familiar and comforting. Now is choice. Better journey together than apart. As they moved through the recovering jungle, the dome's light cycle began to brighten again, signaling the start of a new day. The bioluminescent plants responded their glow, dimming to conserve energy, until the next night cycle. Birds or their alien equivalents had returned to the trees, filling the air with trilling songs that seemed to celebrate the forest's liberation. Brian realized that his mission had fundamentally changed. He had come to this planet as part of a research expedition to study and catalog an alien ecosystem from a position of detached observation. Now he was irrevocably connected to that ecosystem, bound to it through the battle they had fought and the bond formed with Lelani. Their journey back to the Crystal Cave was slower, more peaceful than their desperate flight to the Heart Nest had been. Brian took time to observe the regeneration happening around them, the metallic elements receding from the plant life, the synthetic growths withering away, the natural order reasserting itself with remarkable speed. "The forest remembers its true shape," Lelani explained when he commented on the rapid healing. "Speaker songs help remind. Old patterns return when corruption removed." They rested that night in the Crystal Cave, its resonant formations singing a gentle harmony that eased both their bodies and minds. As they sat beside the glowing pool within the cave, planning their return to the research dome, Brian raised the question that had been troubling him. "How will we know who's real and who's not when we get back to the dome?" Lelani held up the heart crystal, which had begun to regain some of its glow during their journey. "Crystal shows truth. Speaker eyes see difference. Will help separate true from false. And the shifters that remain. You said they'll fade without the source, but how long will that take?" "Days, maybe. Different for each depending on connection strength." She looked at him earnestly. "Must be careful. Fading one's most dangerous. Know they die, seek final incorporation." It was a challenge Brian hadn't anticipated, navigating a community in the midst of such an existential crisis. The human members would need to be protected, the shifter replacements humanely contained, until they naturally dissipated. And all of this would need to be documented, reported back to Earth. "I might need to be carried after all this is over," he joked weakly. Lelani's mouth curved in her version of a smile. "Lelani's strong enough. Can carry Brian if needed." The offer, though likely impractical, given their size difference, touched him deeply. It represented a fundamental shift in their relationship from rescuer and rescued to equal partners facing challenges together. The next day, as they prepared to leave the safety of the Crystal Cave, Brian made a decision. He activated his long-range communicator, broadcasting not to the research dome, but directly to the orbital station that maintained communication with Earth. "This is Technical Specialist Brian Drake, ID Sierra Tango 5904, requesting emergency protocol activation for Dome Sigma 7. Situation code Umbra 7. Requesting ecological specialist team deployment and quarantine procedures." Lelani watched him curiously as he made the transmission. "Calling star people?" "Yes. Specialists who understand ecosystems balance. People who can help us restore what was damaged and protect what remains." He hesitated, then added, "And people who will respect your people, the speakers, as the true guardians of this world." Her amber eyes widened slightly, ears perking forward in obvious pleasure at his words. "Good plan. Speaker Council will meet new humans. Share wisdom." She titled her head. "But first must fix dome humans. Separate true from false." Brian nodded grimly. They had a difficult task ahead, identifying which of his colleagues were still themselves, containing those that weren't, and rebuilding the research mission on a foundation of genuine cooperation rather than exploitation. As they left the crystal cave, stepping back into the healing jungle, Lelani paused. Without a word, she raised her arms expectantly. Brian smiled and lifted her, easily cradling her against his chest, as he had done since their first meeting. But this time, as her arms wrapped around his neck and her head rested against his shoulder, it wasn't a deception or a necessity. It was a choice, a symbol of the trust and connection they had forged through shared danger and shared purpose. "To the dome?" he asked. Lelani nodded, her amber eyes reflecting the dappled light filtering through the canopy above. "To the dome. To new beginning." As Brian carried her through the revitalizing forest, he realized that he had found something he hadn't known. He was missing a purpose, beyond following orders, a connection to something larger than himself. Whatever challenges awaited them at the research dome, whatever complications arose from the shifter infiltration, they would face them together. The fake injury that had brought them together no longer mattered. The journey they had shared, and the journey still to come, that was what truly counted. And if Lelani still asked to be carried long after any practical need had passed, Brian found he didn't mind at all. In fact, as her warm weight settled comfortably in his arms, and her multi-harmonic humming blended with the natural sounds of the forest around them, he couldn't imagine it any other way.